This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I'm Mike Gill. Geoff Mosher's in the house today from the Inside the Birds podcast and InsideTheBirds.com as we take a look at the draft weekend for the Philadelphia Eagles, which, Jeff, a lot of people think they hit it out of the park. They landed Quinyon Mitchell, the corner, on Thursday night. They got Cooper DeJean in the second round, and they just made a bevy of trades over the weekend. I mean, it just every time they were getting on the board, they made another trade, then another trade, then another trade, and somehow they ended up with more picks than they started with, and they added 3 more next year. So a lot to dive into with Geoff here from the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher, what's up, buddy?
What's up, Mike? And you phrased it so well. I mean, talk about the Jekyll and Hyde nature of the draft. The first night, Thursday night, despite all of our talk about moving up or what it's going to take and how he loves to make trades, they acted like the Ravens. They just literally sat there patiently, which is something they very rarely do, and just let the best player fall to them, for them especially. They needed a cornerback so badly. We talked about that. So Quinyon Mitchell, for Howie to not even move up 1 or 2, knowing that the Dolphins were right ahead of them, they could use a corner, showed just some great restraint, and it enabled the Eagles to not have to give up a pick that, they were going to wind up using the next day to trade up to get Cooper DeJean, which is a guy that they had a first-round grade on. So they were able to get 2 first-round prospects. But it's just funny how they felt like the Ravens on Thursday, and then they went just back to being the Eagles Friday and Saturday, just moving off, getting future assets. That was a very vintage Eagles day 2 and day 3 of the draft.
Well, yeah, I mean, Quinyon Mitchell, they get the corner. Like, we had talked a lot about, there was some buzz that they wanted to move up to, 12 to go get him. I mean, what does it say that they were able to get him there and how that kind of shaped the entire weekend for them?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 things about it. One, there was obviously a surprising top 10 to top 15, right? Michael Penix going there to the Falcons. Nobody saw that coming. You saw a big run on quarterbacks, receivers that you thought was going to happen, offensive tackles, and you didn't see a defensive player drafted in the first, was it 15 picks, was it?
Yeah, 14 straight. It was the longest of all time by over 7 picks, by the way.
Yeah, no one could have predicted that, and that obviously helped push the defensive prospects down, and the pass rushers too. So then pass rushers started going off the board at a time where normally the corners would have probably gone off the board had the pass rushers already been taken. So that benefited the Eagles greatly. But when you also say, what does it say about it? Something that Adam and I have been talking about with you on the podcast, and it's not a negative, it's just the reality of the situation, is that this year's slate of corners, first-round corners, had some more question marks than, say, a year or 2 ago when you saw Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn and Sauce Gardner the year after going top 5, top 10. There were just a little bit more question marks about these guys, and no one has said that they're not going to be good, or no one has said that they are like boom bust type guys where, if things don't go well, they'll be terrible. Just they didn't rate at that high blue chip level caliber that you would normally see from someone who goes from when a cornerback goes in the first 5 or 6 picks. And we can go through what those question marks are. I have no problem with that, but that's the overall sense of it.
Yeah, well, they get obviously the first night they stay where they were. We talked about it as you hinted at. Will they have to move up to go get Mitchell? Would they take Terrion Arnold? Why Mitchell over Arnold?
So, I mean, they're both very talented. Mitchell is someone that they had a lot of intel on. His head coach, as I told you last week at Toledo, was teammates with Nick Sirianni at Mount Union. They were both wide receivers. The defensive coordinator at Toledo also is the son of the head coach that Sirianni and Jason Candle played for. So they had a ton of intel on him. He checks off almost every single box you can ask for as far as athleticism, length, body frame, his abilities. Terrion Arnold played a ton of press man coverage at Alabama, not as much zone. Conversely, Toledo plays almost all off coverage. So you've seen a ton of off coverage from Quinyon Mitchell and not as much press man until the Senior Bowl. If you know that, as we've studied the Vic Fangio defense for several years now, you don't see a ton of press man. You do see a lot more zone. You see a lot more match carry deliver which is something you would expect Quinyon Mitchell to be very comfortable with right away, because that's what he did in college. He'll have to learn to play the press man at the times that Vic Fangio wants that. But, how often have we sat after an Eagles game, even after a win, Mike, and said, oh, man, the corners are always playing off. They're always playing off, or they're not manning up. They're not up. But, well, that's kind of a staple of the Fangio defense. And the hope is that a guy like Quinyon Mitchell, who can play off but close on the receiver very quickly, that's where his athleticism shines through. It's called click and close ability. His ability to do that means he can stop the receiver on 3rd and 8 at 7 or 6 yards instead of giving up the first down right in front of him where the guy turns and makes some extra yardage like we've seen over the last few years.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. Is Mitchell a guy that you think makes a big impact, plays a lot right off the bat?
Obviously they want him to. Obviously they'll get him to try to. And again, I would say he should have more of a comfort playing in a Fangio scheme than, say, if he was playing in a Wink Martindale, blitz all the time, man coverage scheme. So I would imagine that he'll get on the field. But the history of guys that the Eagles pick here, especially in the lower, half of the first round, is that they have to earn it. They're going to start off at OTAs on second team and see if they can work their way up. And we'll just have to see how he acclimates. But, yeah, certainly if you ask, shout him up with truth serum, they want him to be good enough to start right away.
Well, and I only say that because obviously Bradbury's here, Slay's here, so he would have to usurp one of those, or one of those would have to be gone.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have talked about when they drafted Lito Shepherd, which is the last time they took a corner in the first round. Lito didn't start right away. Sheldon played. He was a second-round pick. He did play right away, but he didn't start because they had Bobby and they had Troy. And for the younger group, that's Troy Vincent, Bobby Taylor, and they were pretty good. Go to YouTube. But they were, at that point, starting to be on the downsides of their career. Neither of them were coming off a year that James Bradbury is coming off. So you would think that the door is wide open, more so for Quinyon to play right away. But I don't think that they're just going to start him right away, OTAs, training camp, and we'll see what happens with Bradbury. Is he still on the team? Are they able to maybe pawn him off for a 5th or a 6th round by the end of camp? A lot of question marks surrounding that.
All right, I want to get your take on the Cooper DeJean trade, what they gave up to get there. Were you surprised and how he fits in? Because he was a hot name around, and the fact that they made a trade up to go get him, I think, says a lot.
Well, it says that they told you that in the press conference. They said they had him as a first-round grade. They said they contemplated him Thursday night. He has a lot of ability. He was a guy who I thought, would go in top 30, 35. So he was there at 40. So the Eagles felt like it made sense to give up the ammunition to go get a guy that they had, a higher than a top 40 grade on. He's versatile. Vic Fangio's defense can exploit in a good way versatility. He can play safety. He can play nickel. We'll see how much time at corner he gets. And I don't know that they know yet where he's going to be in 3 or 4 years. They probably say at worst it'll be safety, which is, maybe why they didn't take him in the first round. But at best, you may have a corner, or you may have a guy who plays corner and nickel like Sheldon Brown did for such a long time and play it at a high level.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how they use him. Did they draft a guy to play safety right off the bat? Is he going to be in the cornerback mix? I think that's going to be a very interesting storyline. But they traded up to go get Cooper DeJean. I would imagine they have a specific thought or role in mind for him. We'll see. Jalix Hunt in the 3rd round. He's a guy that nobody heard of, nobody knows much about. I got a lot of people saying, oh, this is them outthinking the room. What do you think about Hunt here?
Yeah, I admit to being a little bit skeptical of the pick when it was made. You have to look at level of competition here. Started off at Cornell as a safety, had this tremendous growth spurt in college, and then ended up as a edge rusher at Houston Christian. It's not exactly Alabama, right? We've kind of been down that road before with the Eagles in the past when it's a Brian Smith out of McNeese State, right? Or Chris Gokong out of Cal Poly. That I said on the pod, I hope that this doesn't become like that. But I will say this guy didn't come out of nowhere. He was at the Senior Bowl. He was at the Combine. As Andrew DeCecco really put us on to him, and the months of the pre-draft cycle started to go by, we started to learn, Adam and I, that NFL teams had definitely had their eyes on him. The Eagles brought him in for a 30 visit. So. I remember those days of Brian Smith and Gokong. It's like, who are these guys? I never even heard of them, right? This guy was a known guy. He certainly has great athletic ability. He plays tough. Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl did an interview with Adam and I for our pre-draft show, and he said this guy sets the edge really well. He plays tough. Yes, he's raw. Yes, he's not as refined as some of the first and second round guys, but if you can coach him up, if you have a good edge coach like Jeremiah Washburn, you can get him some good coaching. The aptitude is there. The tool set is there. It just has to be refined. So for a third-round pick, okay, it holds water. And nobody says that this guy should never have been drafted. I mean, I did speak to a few personnel people that didn't have him as high as a third round, but they understood why, with that great athleticism, he could be a third-round pick.
Yeah, is this like a Davion Taylor? I mean, he has more experience, but a guy who's just raw, and you're like, we hope that he gives us something here. And I guess you might say, okay, right, that sounds like it adds up. I know it's the third round, but is there a guy on the board where you're like, man, they had an opportunity to get this guy, and he went with a guy that may have been there in the fourth round?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to see, are there people in that neighborhood that they could have gone with instead? But I'll say this. There's two things I've learned since they picked him. One is that Fangio really liked him. And I've been told that Fangio's a tough guy to please. He wears that old crusty defensive coordinator label pretty well. So that's a feather in the cap there. And two, I did think about the Davion Taylor comparison a little bit, and then some of the ones I was making with either the Brian Smith or is it Brian Smith that I'm saying, or Brian Ty? I can't remember the guy's name from all those years back. But either way, Chris Gokongs and all. The one thing you can say about him, he's not being asked to change a position. He's not being asked to do something he hasn't done before. I mean, Davion Taylor was an off-ball. He was an inside line, but he was always in coverage because they were always trying to use his speed at Colorado. He was not really a guy in the box tackling all the time. Whereas Jalen Hunt is an edge rusher, and he's been an edge rusher here for about a year or two now. So he knows the position. He knows what he's supposed to do. You're not taking him and moving him to defensive tackle. You're not taking him from safety and moving him to linebacker like a Nate Geary, right? So that learning curve part shouldn't be as much of an issue as some of the other sort of quote-unquote developmental projects that they've taken in the past.
All right, let's get to your thoughts on Will Shipley. And here's a guy who's a running back. Not great hands catching the football, but seemed like one of those guys at Clemson who, kind of did everything. He's a guy in the return game. What'd you make of it? They needed a running back here. So Will Shipley, they get that running back here in the fourth.
Yeah, here's something interesting I've found out since they've picked him is that you say not great hands. The Eagles don't necessarily agree with that. They think that he was not just not used as a receiver much in the Clemson offense enough. They didn't, and they want to try to see how he does in their offense catching the football. So that's something to look for to see. Obviously you got Saquon Barkley; he can do both. But after that, they were looking for that out of Kenneth Gainwell. They have not gotten that out of Kenneth Gainwell. They've gotten more of surprisingly, they've gotten the opposite, right? They've gotten a guy they've used in short yardage situations and power running situations and in between the tackle situations, but not the explosive receiver that they thought they were getting out of Memphis. They think Will Shipley has the ability to do it, and they're going to give him a chance to do that when he, shows up for OTAs in camp.
Yeah, I liked what I saw from Shipley at Clemson. I liked him a lot. I think the Eagles will get creative and find ways to try to utilize him around. Aeneas Smith, Texas A&M, he's another interesting guy too. Kind of a slot guy, I would imagine.
Yeah, slot guy, not the fastest guy in the world, but good lateral quickness, also has return ability. I think it's Aeneas, by the way, as we were told. But either way, they brought him in for a 30 visit, and tough for his size. In fact, the thing we learned about both him and Johnny Wilson from Florida State, who they picked on day 3 also, is that despite completely different body size, you're talking about a 5'9" guy and like a 6-something whatever guy, right? A huge guy in Johnny Wilson, is that they're both bring an element of toughness to their position. And the team really didn't have that last year out of the slot position. Ever since they didn't have Zach Pascal, really.
Mm-hmm.
They did not get it from Quez Watkins. It was okay from Zacchaeus, but he's not really a guy who's known for, Jason Avant-style blocking from the slot. And obviously Julio Jones is not blocking people. So they're hoping that they found – let me tell you something. They like these two guys. So these two would be two fun guys to watch during camp. I think that they felt that they got better value from where they picked him.
Yeah, that's Smith and Wilson. And then Jeremiah Trotter was a very popular pick here, obviously. What kind of potential role could Trotter have? Is he a guy that gets drafted late and you're like, hey, this guy plays a lot, or is it just some nostalgia here?
Yeah, well, I don't think it was nostalgia only. I mean, the fifth-round linebacker, this is kind of the territory where the Eagles try to find their linebackers, if not that round, a little later, and sometimes rookie free agents. A guy who knows the position very well, so the Eagles – A, the Eagles know him very well, obviously, but B, they don't have to be worried about his, ability to learn the defense or, have to be taught anything like that. But he is short, and he's not the fastest guy in the world. And this is a game where off-ball linebackers are asked to be good coverage guys and be fast and be rangy and be quick. So it's not necessarily his game, and that's why some people thought he was a third or a fourth, but he actually wound up going in the fifth.
Yeah, it's funny. I had somebody tweeting at me that when they drafted Hunt saying, there's Howie being the smartest guy in the room again when they could have had Trotter, and it's like,
Yep.
I don't think that Trotter needed to be drafted in the third round. Sure enough, he didn't. He was taken 2 rounds later. So they get the guy that a lot of Eagles fans, I guess, were hoping for. And then they go offensive line the last two. So kind of interesting that they fill that with the 2 offensive linemen. And then that is compounded by adding Mekhi Becton yesterday. So they went out and kind of added 2 guys late and Becton. So because everybody kept wondering, are you going to get any depth on the offensive line? So they did it in 2 forms, late in the draft and then getting a former first-round guy.
Yeah, and, got some interesting intel on the Becton signing, and I'm kind of surprised, and I'm in the sort of camp where I'll believe it when I see it, but they've got some plans to work him out also at guard, not just tackle Mekhi Becton, which, at 6'7", that's tall, obviously. It's tall for anything, but it's tall for guard. But, obviously right guard is a spot where they have some uncertainty. Tyler Steen will get the first shot. They signed Matt Hennessy as a depth guy, guard center, and here's Mekhi Becton. So he'll be in the mix, and we'll see. I mean, if Jeff Stelton can make this work, it just adds another, chapter to the Jeff Stelton greatness story.
I think one of the interesting things I read about him is, he's still a young guy, Becton. I mean, so he's a guy who was as young as some of the guys getting drafted here, and you got a guy who's got picked in the first round and has a lot of playing experience. You mentioned the guard thing. I had not heard that before because I was interested to see, because he's such a big guy, 6'6", 6'7", whatever, 360 pounds, is he a guy that they can try out at the guard spot and say, hey, plug him into right guard and see if he can get into that competition? I think that's a pretty interesting, possibility that you just brought up.
Yeah, and it's not like you got a 6'6" quarterback. So I don't know how having a guard that tall would impact quarterback's vision or sight, but that's obviously all stuff to work out throughout here in the spring and the summer.
And by the way, John Ross is going to be hanging out at the rookie camps here, man. Remember him? 4.2 speed. Put him in the slot. See if he can run.
Do I? Let me tell you something. I was a huge John Ross fan coming out of Washington that year that he came out, and I guess that goes to show why I'm probably not a good draft analyst. So, I mean, he's been hurt a lot.
Yeah,
he's been hurt, but there's also the book on him is that maybe not the toughest guy in the world, or maybe not the most competitive thirst, which is surprising. Usually, the Washington guys are known for the opposite, But Sidney Jones showed that a little bit too when he was with the Eagles as a corner. So.
Yeah, all right, man. Geoff Mosher, it was a wild weekend. So many trades. And by the way, I'll get your take on what they did by making all the trades. Not only did they add guys that they liked in this draft, and we'll see how that – it's not about – you never know who's going to hit and who's not. But they added pieces that they liked and that they thought could help. But they got the 3 picks in next year's draft. I think that was kind of an underrated story.
Yeah, 3 picks in next year's draft. You can sandwich those for picks in 2,212. That's not a real year. But, who knows what will happen with those picks. I mean, I think almost every pick the Eagles made in this draft was not even their own pick. It was either like a pick they acquired through a trade or a comp pick.
Well, how many times on Saturday did I tell my girlfriend, the Eagles are on the clock, we can leave next, and then they would make a trade. I'm like, they just made a trade. Give me another 5 minutes. And then the next, it would come up again. I'd say, they're on the clock now. and then they would it happened like 4 times in a row where I was like, all right, we can leave in 5 minutes. And I was like, all right, I'm just getting out of here. I'm done waiting for them to make a pick here. But it was a busy day for Howie Roseman and the crew, and they end up with a corner and a safety and a possible corner. We'll see how that all plays out. When is the mini camp? When are we going to see everybody on the field here?
It's right around the corner. I think, is it next week? You'll have to forgive me. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but it's soon.
All right. Well, it's soon. Yeah, I know. They're doing this for the first time since Sirianni's gotten here, so we'll check that out.
Right.
Geoff Mosher, everybody. Football at 4. The draft class is in, and we'll be talking about it this week here on Football at 4. Thanks, buddy.
All right, Mike. Take care.